We are going to read question number 12 of Who Am I? If anybody is not familiar with Who Am I, which I believe all of you are, but if you are not, please raise your hand. I can give you a very brief intro to what Who Am I is. So, Who Am I, or Nanyar in Tamil, was the first teachings given by Sri Ramana Maharshi. He never wrote anything unless he was asked to. He never answered any questions unless he was asked a question. He had no desire of any kind. He was beyond any definitions. So in the year 1902, a gentleman by the name of Shiv Prakasham Pillai, who was slightly older than Ramana Maharshi himself, who used to work for one of the revenue departments of the southern states of India, and was visiting the town of Tiruvannamalai, where Ramana Maharshi used to be on the mountain. He was on Arunachala, the mountain which is known to be the epitome of the place to burn your ego. The mountain is considered to be the mountain of fire. Aruna is fire, Achala is mountain. It burns your ego. It is also considered to be Shiva in the form of a mountain. Anyway, so he was living on the mountain up on a cave, and Shiv Prakasham Pillai, who had heard this young man's name, who didn't have this name, Ramana Maharshi, at that time he was known as Brahmana Swami, a common name for upper caste in India, Brahmin. So everybody just used to call him Brahman Swami, but people were attracted to him because of his silence. He wasn't talking at all. He didn't talk for 12 years, from the age of 16 until he was 28. In 1902, when Shiv Prakasham Pillai was visiting the town on official work, and since he had heard about Brahmana Swami, he decides to go and talk to him because he had already been a master's in philosophy and had clarity about what he did not have clarity about, which is the premise of having a non-dualistic understanding. Knowing that I don't know is the biggest ultimate knowing that I can have. And Shiv Prakasham Pillai was clear as to what am I, or who am I, whence am I, and that kind of question. Those kinds of questions were kind of beseeching his intellect, troubling him. So he goes up on the mountain, meets Ramana Maharshi, and he talks to him. And one of the first questions he asks is, who am I? And Ramana, because he wasn't talking at that time, Brahmana Swami I should say, he writes answers in the sand with his finger, which would then eventually be published almost after 21 years, as the booklet called Who Am I? And all those questions, which initially roughly about 14 questions, got transcribed as 28 questions. He broke it down. And he also, for the elucidation of people who may not have that kind of philosophical understanding, he added some of his notes. So when for the first time when Ramana Maharshi, by which time he was begun to be known as Ramana Maharshi in 1923, when he first looked at this print, he said, I didn't give all this elaboration. But then he was told that Shiv Prakasham Pillai added for the benefit of others, and he said, okay, we can just keep it there, because his answers were pithy. Okay, somebody is saying I'm late, but that's okay. Thank you for being here. Being late or being early is a factor of time. So that's the synopsis, Mary, about who am I. This would become the preamble of his teachings, and has stayed as the main course of his teachings till date. It appears to be very simple. At times it came from within him. So let's jump to question number 2. Is that a good enough a synopsis for Mary? Or any questions based on what I said? No. Okay, good. So, question number 12. Do you want to
Are
talk?
there no other means for making the mind acquiescent? Other than inquiry, there are no adequate means. If other than the inquiry, there are no adequate means. If through other means it is sought to control the mind will appear to be controlled, but it will again go forth. Through the control of breath also, the mind will become um,
Quiescent.
recreation only for so long as the breath remains controlled. When the breath resumes, the mind will also start moving again and will wander as impelled by residual impressions. The source is the same for both mind and breath.
Thank you, Shweta.
Thought indeed is the nature of the mind. The thought I is the first thought of the mind, and that is egoity. It is from that whence egoity originates that breath also originates. Therefore, when the mind becomes quiescent, the breath is controlled. And when the breath is controlled, the mind becomes quiescent. But in deep sleep, though the mind becomes quiescent, the breath does not stop. This is because of the will of God, so that the body may be preserved and other people may not be under the impression that it is dead. In the state of waking and in samadhi, when the mind becomes quiescent, the breath is controlled. Breath is the gross form of mind. Till the time of death, the mind keeps the breath in the body. And when the body dies, the mind takes the breath along with it. Therefore, the exercise of breath control is only an aid for rendering the mind quiescent. Mano nigraha. It will not destroy the mind. Mano nasa.
Thank you, Sandra.
Like the practice of breath control, meditation on the forms of God, repetition of mantras, restriction of food, etc., are but aids for rendering the mind quiescent. The meditation on the forms of God and through repetition of mantras, the mind becomes one-pointed. The mind is always wandering, just as when a chain is given to an elephant to hold in its trunk, it will go along grasping the chain and nothing else. So also, when the mind is occupied with a name or form, it will grasp that alone. When the mind expands in the form of countless thought, each thought becomes weak. But as thought gets resolved, the mind becomes one-pointed and strong. For such a mind, self-inquiry will become easy. Of all the restrictive rules that relating to the taking of sattvic food in moderate quantity is the best. By observing the rule of sattvic quantity of mind will increase, and that will be helpful to self-inquiry.
Thank you, Mary. I'm sure this question is clear, but if anybody has any questions, please do ask. So I'm sure there are no questions. Very clear. Sattvic basically is food which is bland, not literally bland in taste, but sattvic meaning that which is purer quality, based out of the word sat, which means truth or pure. And so sattvic is one of the three gunas, uh, tamas, rajas, rajasa, and sattva. So even food should be of sattvic quality, where it is not too intense in taste, and it should not be in huge quantity. That sattvic quality, sattvic food increases our own sattvic guna, and therefore it is recommended. So that was the only word that was Sanskrit there. I don't remember. And the footnotes 1 and 2 in the very first paragraph allude to question number 11, verse number 11 and number 12 of Upadesaram. As we read the first paragraph of question number 12, Bhagavan says in that first paragraph, mind will be quiescent or quiescent only so long as the breath remains controlled. The verse number 11 of Upadesaram, which Bhagavan wrote in 1922, for those of us who may not remember, those of us who may not know, is a good revision. Bhagavan wrote Upadesaram in 1922, again at the request of another devotee, Murugna, who asked Bhagavan that we understand. He was writing the legend of the Daruka forest where all the 4 learned ascetics who had learned everything that could be learned by human mind had learned, and yet they had the doubt as to what comes next. And Murugna was writing that legend, and in the legend it goes that then those 4 ascetics, not having found the answer, begin to walk towards the north, thinking that the gods reside in the north, and someday they will come across some entity known as God, and their doubts will be dispelled. And then they meet this young ascetic sitting under a tree, and their first reaction is, look at the fool, he doesn't even know how to meditate, because they're walking towards the north and he's facing them. So they immediately concluded he's facing the south. And by ritualistic practice, and these 4 ascetics had done all the rituals possibly that one could do. And Shiva is the ultimate Lord who brings you beyond the rituals to the ultimate understanding and clarity. So these 4 ascetics' first reaction is, look at the fool. He doesn't even know he's facing the south and meditating. And the second thought was, how did he get here before us if we are the only 4 human beings who could have scaled these heights because of the knowledge we have? It's humanly impossible for people to come up to these heights otherwise. So who is he? And that is when they sit in front of him, and when their minds quieten down a little bit, he remains silent. He doesn't open the eyes. They ask him, who are you? No response. They ask him a couple of questions. No response. He's immersed in samadhi. When they begin to meditate also, because they had done a lot of ritualistic practice, and their mind quietens down, and then Dakshinamurti, the younger form of Shiva that he was, begins to elucidate on the power of silence and the strength of going beyond the rituals. Just like breath is a crutch for meditation and to control the mind, rituals are only a crutch to propel forward, to go forward. So then that young Shiva gives them the elucidation on silence. So Muruganar, who was writing this legend, the legend I just narrated to you, came to this juncture. He said to himself, how can I write about what the young form of Shiva gave the 4 ascetics, the sermon on the ultimate knowledge? So he comes to Ramana and he says, Bhagavan, will you help me? I'm nobody to write about it. I don't know what Shiva would have said. Would you help me? And that is when Ramana Maharshi writes these 30 verses in a very short period of time. So in this, when he says mind would become quiescent when the breath is controlled, but so long as the breath remains controlled, and when the breath resumes, the mind will start moving again, wandering again. That is verse number 11. We had sent the link earlier. Verse number 11 says, Vayurodhanat liyate mana jala pakshivat drodha sadram. Basically, he's saying mind, the meaning, I'm just going to read the meaning first. The breath control is a means of controlling the mind, just like a net is for controlling the bird from flying away. By watching the breath, the mind is absorbed. So here's the meaning for everybody. Through breath control, the movement of the mind is contained, just as a bird is restrained when caught in a net. When you let go of the breath, the mind also wanders away. So it's not the ultimate way to control the mind. Because Bhagavan always professed that you have to annihilate the mind, you have to control and kill the mind to be able to get beyond the fallacy that your mind has camouflaged you by thinking you are this body. That's the ultimate understanding, that you are not this body. How could you get there unless you annihilate the mind? Annihilation of the mind meaning not objectifying with anything around me, not having any definition or attributes or color or shape of anything around me. Reality alone is, but I see reality as this desk and this laptop and my phone and this and that and my money and all that. But I'm beyond that. I'm the reality that exists. The breath that comes in the body is a reality. And I am that cosmic energy, which I erroneously take to be the limited entity. So verse number 11 is Vayu Rodhanat Liyate Manah Jala Pakshivat Drodasad. And then after a couple of sentences, Bhagavan uses another sentence which we read. The source of the mind and the breath is the same. And the very next verse of Updesaram says, number 12, Chittavayava Chitriya Yutaha Shakayordvai Shakti Mulaka. Shaka Yordvai, Shaka branches, Yordvai, two branches, Shakti from the Maya, from the Shakti. Mulaka, their source is the same. The source of the breath and the source of the mind is the same. It is emerging from that Shakti. And therefore they are just like the two branches emanating from the same source. Chittavayava Chitkriya. The mind and breath are endowed with the function or the ability to know and act. These two are like two branches stemming from a single power, Shakti or Maya. So Bhagavan, it's interesting that Bhagavan talked about the same concept in 1902 when he was just about 23 years old. And he wrote this Updesaram in 1922, a year prior to the first publication of Who Am I was brought to him. And the concept of many of these things are similar. Though he had not absorbed or formally trained himself to learn anything. It was all because of his own prarabdha and purva karma. So those two verses allude to this. Here is verse number 12. Chittavayava Chitkriya Yutaha. Chittavayava, chitta, mind.
So that's interesting about the breath. Yeah, I'm Peter, although you see the name Corey as my Zoom name. And I'm in Kyoto, Japan. And in the question 12, I think it's interesting, the reference to ego is emerging with the breath. Well, that would mean at birth, or maybe even before birth. I don't know. Because I think it's important so it's not to be confused with ego as a feeling of being great or being admired or something like that. It's something much, much more profound than that. So even if we are able to control our need for esteem from other people, we're still stuck with the ego. So whenever the breath is there is mind. Is that the right understanding?
Yes, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Yep. There's no mind without the ego. There's ego is the mind, and the mind does not exist without the breath. So mind is, there's a verse that he wrote in Avdesaram again, verse number 17. Manasam tukim margane krite naiva manasam margarjavata. He says, what is the nature of the mind? He says, if you inquire into the nature of the mind, you will find out that mind is nothing but thoughts and thought forms. And that's exactly what Peter just commented upon. That's absolutely right. There is nothing other than thoughts that can be identified as mind, and there's nothing other than ego which can be linked to the mind or to the thoughts. All our thoughts, as Bhagavan has further clarified, that the first thought is the I thought. I thought is the primordial thought of every human being, not only because of this birth, as you said, Peter, very succinctly, the breath is not just from this birth. My mind is not just from this birth. My mind is an accumulation, a cascade of waves, and the waves of the ocean are wider than the expanse of the universe. Excuse me. So I'm born with predispositions from previous existence that I've already experienced. And therefore, my mind is a bundle of thoughts not only from this life, but from previous lives. That's why I have vasanas, and my vasanas create my prarabdha. And that's why I continue to accumulate more vasana, more prarabdha as I go forward. My karma, whether sanchit or agami, is being accumulated. Sanchit karma is those karma that have yet not come to fruition and are not shaping the events of my life. Prarabdha is those karma which have come to the fruition and that orchestrate my prarabdha. My getting hurt, or my getting fired from a job, or getting a job, or getting married, or not being able to get married, or falling sick, or dying early, or not dying even though I want to die. Although that is prarabdha. Everything that's happening is beyond my control anyway. I just don't accept it as being beyond my control. That is my problem. I don't accept it as being beyond my control because of my mind, which governs me by saying, you control everything, you can do this, you can do that. I can't. I don't. That clarity, that I don't have the clarity, that I don't have any power, is what is required. All that is required is that.
Like to ask a question, please?
Sure, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Is the correct, quote unquote, correct methodology of living your life is surrender?
Absolutely.
According to this
Absolutely.
teaching?
Yeah, sorry, I thought you had finished. Go ahead, Mona.
No, I finished.
Yeah, that is exactly what Bhagavan used to say. So if one can surrender, if we can all surrender now, we can be realized here and now. My mind doesn't allow me to surrender. My mind keeps breaking me outwardly, make me extroverted, and I go after objects and I try to hold on to the objects as something which is going to give me everlasting happiness. And I cannot find happiness in anything external than myself. I need to go internally, inside me, absorb myself in my heart. That is surrender. That is dropping the mind, dropping my attributes, dropping my definitions, dropping whatever I am, and accepting myself as nobody is a big surrender. That is the ultimate. If we can surrender, we don't need anything else. If we can partially surrender, because many devotees talk to Bhagavan And many times people implored Bhagwan, it's very difficult to surrender completely. And Bhagwan did admit, Bhagwan did say in his own words, total surrender will only come with the grace of your Guru and absolutely when you annihilated the mind. And there's verse number 28 and 29 and 27, Bandha Muktiti, Inubdesaram, no need to quote it, also alludes to the same fact. So surrender is the only way. And we should be happy with whatever difficulties we have in life, because difficulties bring me closer to the reality, to that truth, that things are not being governed by me. They are being given unto this body, not to me. I'm beyond the body. I'm not this body. And everything that's happening is related only to the body, not to me. I'm the same entity which the cosmos is. I'm nothing other than the cosmos. It is my... Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Okay, so last week in the satsang, we spoke about detachment. So is detachment and surrender to be considered the same thing? Or does detachment, practice of detachment, put me in a position where I'm better able to surrender?
Wow, wonderful. Thank you for asking that. And I'm glad, because last week this question came up in a different, with different kind of wordings. The last week, the question, if I can recall, was, is indifference the same as detachment? And the answer was...
Not the same.
Right? Peter, you
not
asked
the same.
Sorry.
Yeah, indifference, not the same.
I'm sorry, I'm not getting you, Peter. I'm losing you.
What conclusion was reached that indifference is not the same as detachment?
In a limited way, it is not. And I'm glad you asked about detachment. So your question today is detachment the same as surrender, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, that's why I wanted to go back to the last week. One thing that had not been mentioned last week was, verbally wasn't mentioned, I did write to somebody, but that indifference in Sanskrit is a very deep word. There are two words used for indifference in Sanskrit. Udasin is actually used more commonly as udasin. It's an exalted quality of a realized soul that he's indifferent to anything happening around him because he does not see duality in what he sees. So for a realized soul, but to coming back to that indifference for a mortal like Bandhu is based out of selfishness. I don't care about you. I don't have to worry about anybody else. As long as my life is going on all right, I don't worry about it. I don't have to feed a homeless man. I don't have to protect the animal kingdom around me. I don't have to feed them. As long as I'm fed, I'm okay. That indifference is selfishness. That indifference is rather taking me away from the spiritual quality. I'm not even spiritual, though I may be doing this and that and calling myself spiritual, but I'm not. So that indifference for an exalted soul, or for a person like you and I, when we become detached, then that indifference is a good quality, and therefore detachment, total detachment. I'm not attached to anything. I'm not attached to my money. I'm not attached to my job. I'm not attached to my reputation. And if I can reach that level of detachment, then that is surrender. I cannot have, it's like breath and mind. I cannot be detached if I'm not surrendered. I cannot surrender unless I'm detached. A man had once lost a lot of money, and he asked Bhagwan, and I've narrated this earlier also, because these talks become mantras for us. If we regurgitate this, it helps us. And he asked Bhagwan, why did I lose all this money? I'm a hardworking man. I'm not into any clandestine activity. I'm not making money by hook or crook. I'm not doing anything incorrect, and I'm your devotee, I'm a spiritual man, I come and meet you and I lost so much of money, all this is gone. Why? I need to understand. And Ramana Maharshi many times just won't answer. He would just keep quiet because, silence was the ultimate teaching he wanted to give. When he was insisted that please respond, at least give me some response, I need some solace from it. And he said, where was the money before it came to you? The person was flabbergasted. He said, where was the money before it came to me? Bhagwan, I don't know. He said it went back from where it had come. Because when I get money, when I become successful, and I give myself a lot of credit for becoming successful, it is still beyond my control, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't have been unsuccessful. I couldn't have failed if I really knew how to be permanently successful. And none of us are in a situation, in a position, in a place where we can say, everything about me is consistent. It's easy for me to realize that nothing about me is consistent. Everything is totally changing all the time. Not only my personality, my attributes, my assets, everything is changing. I just, because of my ego, which has camouflaged the whole thing, keeps telling me I'm protected. So, Peter, coming back to your question, yes, detachment and surrender go together. And going back to the last week question, indifference is based out of selfishness. If I'm limited as a limited human being, I may be thinking I'm a very spiritual person, but I'm not. Just as when we really mature into this practice, then we begin to see the limitation of my limited egotistical self, and I accept it. My accepting of my own weakness as a man with lots of weaknesses, not to lament about it, not to condemn myself about it. Bhagavan has said, don't even think about it, is the first step towards my detachment. Because then I'm detached from my own definition. Then when people trample me or curse me or spit at me, I'm not ruffled. I'm ruffled for a short period of time and I regain equanimity very quickly. If I'm afflicted with pain, I can look beyond my body and say there have been many, many lives where I had a different kind of course of life.
I just want to comment that between the breath and the mind. So I just read once in Buddhism that sometimes we use the breath for as a tool to quiet the mind and gain other purposes. But when you're dead, or when the body is dead, and there's no more breath, in what are you going to concentrate it? Because the mind is still there, right? Mind is still wandering, but no more breath. And also in deep sleep, there is no mind, there is breath. So I don't know if you can comment something like
See,
it's not a question. It's
yeah, sure. I think it's a very apt question. What happens when we die because the breath is stopped? Just as Bhagavan said in this particular question we read, that when we sleep, the mind becomes quiescent, but the breath does not come to a complete halt. And he says it is because of the will of God that he wants us not to be identified as a dead body when we are alive, but in deep sleep the mind has become quiescent. We read that today. Now, it flips and exact vice versa emanates when we die. When we die, the breath completely annihilates and the mind propels forward and the mind goes away from us into the next entity that we may embody or whatever form we take. So the thought, what happens to me after death, is only an objectifiable thought, if I may coin the expression, that thought is based on me being attached to this entity which is called Bandhu or Katina, because I think I'm still this, therefore after death what will happen to me? I'm not even this Bandhu even when I'm alive, because Bandhu is the name for this body. So I should not be worried about what will happen to me when my breath completely stops. It does not exist. It does not exist at that time because you haven't experienced it yet. Bhagwan used to say, and some people used to feel that it was like rather rude for him, but he wanted us to come back to the reality. He used to say to people who have, this question was asked many similar questions. Well, I don't mean to say exactly these wordings, but very similar question. Bhagwan used to say, why don't you ask me this question when you are dead? Or when people talked about previous lives, you would say, why didn't you ask me that in the previous life? Just be here and now in the present moment. Summaira was the Tamil word he used to use. Be here, be present and here, or stay for which you have come, or stay put, don't do anything. So surrender basically is leaving it to him. As Bhagwan has also said in Who Am I? We probably already read it. Do you carry your luggage when you're traveling? You don't carry your luggage on your head when you're traveling by train or plane. Similarly, he says, why do you carry your load? Why don't you leave it to your Lord, to your God, to your whatever faith you have? And he shall take care of it just as every other creature. Now ponder over this. Every other creature other than human being are surviving because of the cosmic equation. They don't plan their meal, they don't cook their food, they don't have a kitchen, they don't have a taste, they don't select food, they eat instinctively, they don't know what taste is, their menu is fixed, they don't, so the thought, what would happen to my mind, or what would happen my breath when my breath is completely stopped, is only again an attachment to my body. That's the way to look at it. Though the question is absolutely apt. What happens? Nothing. It's like when we faint, and all of us may have, at least I have fainted more than a few times. When we faint, we don't know what's happening to us, right? But the breath is there. The only difference between death and sleep is Bhagwan, again, to quote Bhagwan has said, death is just a longer sleep. Sleep is a short one. After about 8-10 hours, you wake up and you again go through the motions of your day. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. The thoughts that enter our mind, people tend to look at them as being a detrimental thing, and I'm in my personhood, and I have to be silent to have this wisdom. And I feel like a lot of it is just acknowledging that there is thought there and recognizing where that is coming from. It's not like when you buy into what the mind is saying and feel shameful, perhaps is a good word for it, then you're just continuing with the mind of feeling like you're not doing something correctly, when really it's just acknowledging that there is a thought there and that is okay, and that love comes with accepting every thought that enters your mind and not being attached to it, but just letting it free flow in and out. And to do that with others as well. If you can practice that with yourself, it might be easier. And for others, it might be easier to practice accepting the people around them just as they are. And every breath and every word that they say is being their truth in that moment, leading up to hopefully acknowledgement of the mind and thoughts that enter. That's all I wanted to say.
Good. Yeah, the very practical way of describing it. Yes, that's a practical daily manifestation of my practice and accepting everybody around me so that, that's very good. Thank you, Mary. Yeah. It's very, this comes to test when you live in a community. And I lived in ashrams quite a number of years. And this, you are able to put it in practice. And sometimes you're challenged very, very severely. Because you're interacting with people. You never have a private moment. You're always interacting, living in an ashram, especially if you're managing the ashram. And to not react is a good practice. Reacting less and accepting more. Thank you, Mary, for your thoughts.
No, thank you for the thoughts. My mind is very active, but I think that sometimes just the act of staying physically quiet is helpful.
Physically is helpful, you said?
Quiet.
Oh, yes. Wonderful. Francis, where you go? Oh, yes, there you go.
Thank you. Just being quiet. It's a good. I took in the 12 in the non-yar, and I took in 11 from the Sara, and it's it is being still for me now. I think there's we can get too busy with the different things that come up in spirituality. So, you can get distracted with trying to be spiritual, and so it is a discipline that Ramana is a great example of. What was the words you used that he said one time to the devotee who went into to the food they were eating, and he said to be quiet?
Tell me a little bit more about it. I'm trying to recall which one are you referring to.
It was a word that to
Sumaira.
Yes.
Sumaira. He used to tell people quite a bit that,
That's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. Always. Thanks for that comment. Anyatha sharanam nasti tvameva sharanam mama tasmat karunya bhave rakshamam ramaneshwara rakshamam ramaneshwara rakshamam ramaneshwara.